When this family took this selfie during their vacation at the lake, they never expected that this could be the result. In fact, they had accidentally captured an incredible secret, and if they had not been standing in this very spot at that exact moment, this sad secret would have been hidden forever. Because without their help, this mystery could have never been solved. Family makes selfie, but doesn't see what happens in the background. It was a warm summer day in July when the Robertson family decided to take a much-needed vacation to the serene Lake Kessler. The picturesque lake was surrounded by lush greenery and towering mountains, making it the perfect spot for a relaxing getaway. As they arrived at their cabin, the family of 4 couldn't wait to start exploring the beautiful surroundings. They spent the day kayaking, fishing, and hiking, capturing every moment with their camera. As their first day was ending, the Robertson family decided to take a family selfie in front of the lake. They huddled together, smiling widely as they snapped the photo. Little did they know that something was happening in the background that would change their lives forever. As they reviewed the photo, they noticed a strange figure lurking in the background. At first, they dismissed it as a trick of the light. But as they zoomed in, their hearts began to race. It was a man dressed in black, and he was staring directly at them. The family immediately felt a chill run down their spines. Who was he? What was he doing there? They tried to brush it off and enjoy the rest of their vacation, but they couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Every time they went outside, they felt like someone was following them. And on the third day at the lake, this feeling led to a rather bizarre string of events. They arrived at the place where the first selfie was made. They were about to throw a frisbee in the water. The children were ready to run after it during a nice day of relaxing by the lake. But this day would be far from relaxing for the family of 4. They didn't know exactly why they kept returning to this exact spot. Was it the nice shade? Or maybe they were hoping to see that mysterious man again. Sharon, the mother of the family, looked around her and tried to see where the sound was coming from. At first, the lake seemed fully deserted that day, and they were the only family there, but nothing could be further from the truth. When she looked again, but closer this time, she saw something moving among the trees. Was it a deer? No, it was clearly walking on 2 legs and rather making a screaming sound. Was someone in distress? The family went to investigate, and it wouldn't be long before they made an incredible discovery. It was their little son who was the first to discover what was hiding in the woods. For over half an hour, Sharon and her family searched around the lake. They searched everywhere for traces of the mysterious phantom, but nothing was found. The sound had also disappeared by now, which made the search much more difficult. The woods were huge, and Sharon began to believe that this search would probably come to nothing. But nothing was further from the truth, because just before they were about to give up, another loud noise sounded from the woods. The same grim screech, but this time much closer. They did not hesitate for a moment and took off running. It was their son, Kevin, who heard the sound first, and he was off immediately. While his parents and sister were still trying to figure out where the sound was coming from, Kevin was already in full sprint towards the sound they heard. His ears had immediately detected the location of the sound, and he ran toward it in a straight line. Sharon and her husband were still trying to call Kevin back. They were very concerned because it could be very dangerous there, but Kevin no longer heard his parents' plea. His attention was completely focused on the shrill sound in the distance. He was almost at the source of the sound and still had no idea what he would find there. Once he arrived at the place where the sound came from, Kevin saw an abandoned camp. It was very primitive. Mainly some long branches and a net of leaves that together provided a shelter from the rain. He also saw a campfire that was no longer burning. But the campfire was still smoking briskly. Someone was here a short time ago, he told himself aloud. And then suddenly he felt a cold hand on his shoulder. The boy turned around with an anxious look. "Dad," the boy called out, but his parents and sister were nowhere near. The boy had run so fast that his parents were still hundreds of yards away from the camp. Kevin turned and looked straight into the eyes of a feral old man. Kevin turned toward the area where his family were still trying to keep up, and Kevin called loudly for help. "Mom, Dad, Judith, come quick." Kevin still carefully tried to take a few steps away from the old man as he shouted this, but the bearded old man stopped him. "What are you doing here?" the old man asked the little boy. Kevin was frightened and couldn't believe he was now standing here alone. Why did he always have to react so immediately to his impulses? While stuttering, Kevin tried to find words as his parents arrived at the location of the camp. "Keep your hands off my son," Carl yelled at the old man. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" Kevin's father demanded to know. After all, while they were trying to catch up with Kevin, he had seen the scary old man in the photo the family took. Here the man could be seen completely naked, and Carl did not know what he was capable of. The old man slowly sat down against a tree. When he finally had his butt planted, he began to chuckle. "What's so funny? What is this camp and why are you walking around here in the wild?" Were all questions the family asked the old man. His smile disappeared and he now looked at them with a serious look. "You guys go and sit quietly on that fallen tree. I will tell you the whole story in peace," the old man spoke. The Lindenberg family took a seat on the tree trunk and waited for the first words of the then unknown man. He took a few deep breaths and then he said the following. His name was Jacob Trumbull. He was 85 years old and was a resident of the Lexington Retirement Home, an elder care location about 20 miles away. He had been there for years, and being of advanced age, he had already seen all his friends go. Family still came occasionally, but otherwise he sat there alone, so he decided he was completely done with it. Every day he would stare out the window and look at an outside world where there were tremendous adventures to be had. But Jacob sat inside in a chair while caretakers kept him small. He was done with it, and so he decided to do the following. Just before the longest day of the year, he slipped out of his room after the 8:30 a.m. chime. After that time, caregivers didn't come to check on how you were doing, so he had quite a few hours of sunlight left. Time enough to create distance between him and the retirement home. Jacob had his whole plan all figured out. He had been hoarding several weeks' worth of food in his nightstand. That way he could survive off of that for a while until he found a spot in the wild. And then, when it was finally 8:30, he grabbed his disguise and snuck out of his room. The old man had filled his backpack with gelatin pudding and carried sturdy hiking boots. This would provide the base for his journey, but this equipment would get him noticed immediately by attendants and security. Therefore, he carried the bag on his stomach and put on his robe hanging down to the ground to hide everything. When caretakers approached him, he told them he needed to go to the bathroom, and luckily this was believed. Before he knew it, he was outside the door of the home. And with a few hours of daylight left, he managed to create almost 7 miles of distance between him and the retirement home. But then came the biggest challenge of that already daring day. The Lindenberg family hung on every word. Because every word sounded like a well-crafted book, and the family could not stop reading. Jacob told them how he had made his night shelter under a fallen tree. He had put some leaves over it and raised everything. Even a fire had been made with some twigs and the lighter he had stolen from one of his companions. It was beautiful out there, and it seemed to be a quiet night under the stars, but then Jacob suddenly had an unexpected visitor. Jacob said that around 2 a.m. in the night, he was startled awake by a grim growl and a scary rustling. And when he carefully opened his eyes, he was face to face with an 8-foot-tall bear. He thought his last moment on earth had arrived. He was 85 and for the most part had lived a fine life, but to reach the finish line so soon into his adventure did not please him. He could have stayed safely in the retirement home and nothing would have been wrong, but Jacob manned up and reminded himself why he had left there in the first place. This gave him the courage and, more importantly, the adrenaline to do the next thing. The 85-year-old old man stood up and made himself tall. He waved his arms in the air, and his eyes shone with the energy of a man many times younger. He could not believe he was doing this. He pushed his chest forward and slapped it hard. And in that moment there was no longer any sign of that crippled old man, languishing in that little room of the old people's home. No, Jacob was a proud, energetic adventurer, and nothing or no one would be able to stop him, but would this bear feel the same way? "And what did the bear do then?" asked Kevin to Jacob. "I was so absorbed in my thoughts and proud of my newfound energy that I completely forgot I was doing it to chase away a bear," Jacob told the listening family. The bear looked at Jacob confused. Its large open mouth full of teeth then slowly closed, and the bear went back to standing quietly on all fours. But the animal did not feel chased away at all. In fact, it moved closer and closer to the old man. And then the bear did something Jacob could never have seen coming. It gave Jacob a lick across its face and sat down next to him by the fire. Jacob told the family that it was almost as if that moment of bravery had instilled a form of respect in the bear. Jacob was no longer food, but an equal, and so the bear would treat him accordingly. Since then, Jacob was best friends with the bear, and even with her little bear cubs, Jacob got along well. All summer and autumn he lived outdoors with these wild but beautiful animals, and just as he was telling this story, the mother bear came running with her children. Would they also be as friendly to the Lindenberg family? Jacob again made himself big and slapped his chest vigorously a few times. The mother bear clearly reacted to this and growled loudly twice. She sniffed the family and then calmly sat back down next to her friend Jacob. Jacob explained that the Lindenberg family were the first people he had seen since his trip had started. He was happy to have some people around again. He also mentioned that he was finally happy here in nature again, which was in contrast to the old people's home. There was only one problem. Winter was around the corner, and it promised to be a harsh one. The Lindenberg family looked at the particular man, then they looked at each other, and then back at the man. Jacob's story was so extraordinary that they had to help him. So at that moment they all cried out simultaneously, "With that harsh winter, maybe we can help." Jacob did not know what that was going to entail, but their tone excited him. He stood up and asked what they could do for him then. And the answer the family gave was heartwarming. The family was here on vacation, but the area was by no means foreign to this family. They had a log cabin here deep in the woods that had been owned by their family for generations. It was a bit primitive, but with a wood stove there, it was cozy and warm. They themselves used the log cabin only once a year to visit this beautiful area. But the rest of the year it was completely empty. A real shame, really, and in this case they could also make someone happy with it. Therefore, they made Jacob the following proposal. Jacob was invited to come to the log cabin with the family. They themselves would leave in a few days and then not return until next year. The family showed the old man around and told him he could live here for free and for nothing. They would then come to see him again next year, when they themselves would stay there again for their vacation. They gave him a generous supply of food, even though Jacob told them he could live off the land just fine, and left a few days later. And just before they left they saw an image they would never forget. As they left while walking over the hill behind the house, they saw Jacob standing, waving gratefully with his hands high in the air. "Until next year, dear people," he called out loudly. The family smiled at the special man and then looked in amazement in the direction of their old log cabin. For there beside Jacob, the mother bear with her cubs appeared once again. She had followed the family and the old man and clearly wanted to stay with him. Meanwhile, the family returned to the log cabin for the first time. Jacob is doing well and is still living daily with his bear buddies. The cubs have now grown considerably, and the children were only too happy to play with the big fluffy bears when they returned. After 1 week, the family had to leave again with pain in their hearts. But they were looking forward to the next meeting. "Until next year, Jacob," everyone shouted. It is always a sad moment when they have to leave Jacob and his bears. But friends always come back.